Morning, everybody, and welcome to Datum's webinar to discuss why procurement should always be involved with managing agency labour. Just a few introductions. My name's Jared Mollison. I am the Sales Director for Datum. And for those of you who don't already know Datum, we are a business who help companies who've got a large spend on agency labour to manage it, to make cost savings and service improvements. I've got with me today Kevin Moran. Kevin is the MD of his own procurement consultancy. And for those of you who are in need of any procurement consultancy advice, then we will share his contact details and you can get in contact with him after this webinar. Just a few housekeeping rules, I guess. Happy for you to ask questions, but if you can do those in the Q&A box, then we will, I'll ask those questions of Kevin at the end so that we can keep the flow going. So just a bit of a story really before I pass over to Kevin. I met Kevin around about 7 years ago when he was the Group Procurement Director for Galliford Try, quite a large and complex business, and he was responsible for managing the agency spend there, which was a very large and complex area of spend, and I'll let Kevin go into the details about that. But when I went into the meeting, I could sort of see by the look on Kevin's face that he was looking at me thinking, what can this guy tell me about how to manage my agency labour that I don't already know? And I think it's fair to say over the course of the next hour or so, he highlighted to me that actually that was the case and that there wasn't really anything that I could teach him, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's always good to have meetings with educated buyers. So it wasn't all bad. We have kept in touch and hopefully, I like to think we've built up a bit of a mutual respect for each other, and we've sparred on a number of occasions at various different businesses that Kevin's been at since then. We've had many conversations, and when I decided to run this webinar, and I thought, well, who can I call on who can give an independent view of managing agency labour? Kevin was my first choice, and I was really delighted when he agreed to come on today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Kevin, and we'll crack on with the webinar.
Okay, thanks, Jared. Good morning, everybody. Just a bit of a declaration, really. I have no commercial relationship with Datum. Never actually traded with Datum, and all credit to Gerard's skills of persuasion. I'm actually doing this for nothing as well. So what do I know about agency labour? As Gerard mentioned, I was Group Procurement Director with Galliford Try, and I personally managed the agency labour spend, which was about 65 million, and very complex category in terms of the sectors that Galliford Try worked in, everything from private housing, partnership housing, civil engineering, infrastructure, utilities, facilities management, and geographically spreading from the Shetland Islands to the Falkland Islands, actually, and the whole of the UK. And I originally took that from a basket case of supply chain of about 150 agencies and to what I like to think is a very well structured and managed PSL of about 11 agencies. So I've had a lot of experience of doing it. And when I, in my current role as a consultant, one of the first things I do is ask clients to provide them with a schedule, a list of all of the categories that they probably got a trading agreement on, and all the categories that there's a potential for them to have a trading agreement on. And that forms the basis of my initial discussions with them. And as ever in those kind of things, it's the gaps that are always the most interesting. And agency labour is more often than not something they haven't got a trading agreement on. So which I always ask, why haven't you got an agreement on agency labour? And the response is always, we wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. Okay, so why not? And there is this myth of what I call category exceptionalism, that there's something about agency labour which is so completely different from every other category that they manage that none of their standard approaches and procedures will work. That the supply chain is far too complex. Where do we start? Well, that is true. I mean, the agency labour market is probably the least consolidated sector in the industry, and even the big boys like Hayes and Randstad have less than 10% of the market. But that's not really a problem, to be honest with you. You know, there's the assumption that the requirements are always immediate, they're unforeseeable, they can't be planned, and therefore the normal commercial procedures aren't going to apply. So it has to be left to run its course. And there's also something some of the agencies are very good at, is perpetuating this myth that they have this unique source to temporary labour that none of the other agencies have. None of that is true. It is absolute, complete nonsense. But I believe the same initially. I got dragged kicking and screaming into managing agency labour when the agency worker regulations came out, which exposed a lot of organisations like Galliford Try to quite a lot of regulatory risk. So the HR department, bless them, flagged up to the exec board that we could no longer let the Wild West approach perpetuate for that category. So I got dragged kicking and screaming and got lumbered with the category. And in the process of taming it, if you like, it was actually one of the most interesting things I've ever had to deal with in terms of my career, in terms of actually managing it. But the consequences of that Wild West approach for Galliford Try and any other business can be quite expensive. At a basic level, companies are going to be paying far too much for their agency workers. And that's not in terms of the rate that the worker is receiving, it's the markup the agencies are making. You'll quite often see margins or markups of between 25 or 30%, and compared to markups of about 12 or 15% when you've got more regulated relationships. So not only are you paying too much for it, you're buying too much of it as well, because the normal checks and balances that are there for any other category don't exist. So the instances where if you had these proper checks and balances, somebody with an appropriate position in the company would say, no, you're not going to have that temporary worker, or they would say, okay, you have them for 8 weeks, and no, you can't have them for any longer, don't exist. So you get somebody who was taken on for 8 weeks only to help a site manager out when the show area is opening, and he ends up getting a long service award for the company because he's been there so long. The other big problem, because a lot of the processes are outside the tent rather than inside the tent, and temporary workers are being engaged without purchase orders or whatever the process is for any category within your business, there's poor cost visibility, because costs don't actually become visible until they appear on your ledger generally. But if you've got invoices constantly bouncing out the system because there's no purchase order, or because the order value is expired, those costs remain invisible. And you can get the situation where a surveyor's doing a final account for a job, everything's looking pretty good, and then all of a sudden 80 grand's worth of costs come out of nowhere when a load of agency age debt has been cleared. And in my own personal experience of Galliford Try, we had a business where we got to the year end and there was over £1 million worth of cost on agency labour that they were not aware that they had a liability for. The other thing is agencies proliferate. If there's no controls in place, a new site manager joins the company, he can see there's nothing in place in terms of regulating this category. So he starts using the agencies that he's used to. You know, they breed like rats, they really do. And the whole supply chain just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. One of the other things that people don't generally know, if you've hired a temporary worker previously, the agency loses their exclusive right to that temporary worker. So if you decide to engage them again, you can insist that they're engaged on what's called a payroll rate, which can be as low as a 4% markup. But we have situations where we had temporary workers who've been with us for years. I didn't even realise they were temporary workers, actually. And they've moved from site to site to site over a 2 or 3 year period. Each time we were paying the full markup to the agency, where from the first time that we engaged them, we could have been engaged them on a much lower payroll rate. Something that is becoming more of a risk is regulatory risk, illegal immigration, tax fraud, IR35, modern slavery. If you if you're not regulating this category properly, you run a risk of that. In instances recently with Biffa, the waste management company, turned out a lot of their temporary workers were part of a bonded labour scheme, which comes under the heading of modern slavery. The agencies aren't going to do anything about this, okay, because they have lots of geese laying golden eggs. They are making big markups, okay. They can get temporary workers on site at the whim of the site manager. Why should they rock the boat? So they don't. So the situation continues. So why should procurement get involved? Well, because procurement have got the skills to manage it, okay. The core skills and process that they have are perfectly suitable for managing agency labour. At an operational level, they have very good relationship with the key internal customer, which tends to be the site managers, excuse me. And more importantly, they know their internal customer. They know what site managers are like. They know that if a site manager has got an opportunity to spend in an unregulated part of the business, they're going to fill their boots. So they know how to control site managers. They're used to dealing with unplanned requirements as well. They're also used to managing framework agreements that run across more than one site or even more than one business. And the core processes they use are exactly the same as a specific category they probably already manage, which is plant hire. If you look at agency labour and plant hire, a resource is procured, it goes to a site, it stays on site for a set period of time, it is probably paid for weekly, and at the end of that period, if the processes are working properly, it is off-hired. That's the same as agency labour. Agency labour is human plant hire. No disrespect to agency workers as human beings, but in terms of process, it's exactly the same as plant hire. So there is absolutely no issues with procurement managing this category at all. So if as a procurement team, you can see in your business that this is unregulated and you decided to grasp the nettle and get involved, first thing to do obviously is make a business case to your exec or however it's structured within your business. Now there's lots of elements to a business case, but I always think the one that should be on top is financial savings. Money talks, and you're going to be able to offer the business a saving of between 10 and 20%, entirely realistically, and without breaking into too much of a sweat. You're going to do that in two ways. You're going to be able to reduce the markup that the agencies are working on, and you're going to be able to reduce the quantity of temporary workers that your businesses use. Because like any other trading agreement you will have processes of approval and what have you. So there'll be checks and balances in place where a decision will be made. No, you're not going to have a temporary worker, or no, he's going to go off the site after 8 weeks. So financial savings of 10 and 20% are entirely achievable. So if you're spending £1 million a year, we're talking between 100 and 200,000 pounds, okay, quite easily without breaking into a sweat. You're also going to be able to offer increased cost visibility, because the processes are going to be inside the tent, not outside the tent. You're going to reduce those situations where surveyors have a heart attack when they're doing final accounts, because all of a sudden they get hit with 80 grand of costs after a load of agency age debt is cleared. You're going to be able to reduce the regulatory risk that your company is exposed to, because even though it may be the agency that's at fault in terms of the breach of regulations, it's not the agency that will end up in the newspapers, as people like Biffa found, as people like Sports Direct found a few years ago as well. So that's another valid reason to get involved. So all that adds up to a fairly solid business case, which I can't think why your exec board within your company, if you're able to paint this picture of savings, better processes, less regulatory risk, why they wouldn't say, go ahead with it. So assuming you've got the go ahead, where do you start? The first thing you want to do is make sense of the chaos, because it will be chaos. There'll be agencies that you know about, there'll be agencies that you don't know about, and there'll be agencies that you don't know about. So you need to talk to everybody within the business and trawl through the purchase ledger to try and identify all those agencies are. And you're going to want them to provide you with information. So, and a lot of them might not be willing to provide it. So I think it's important that you convey to them that you're now going to be reviewing this category and you're looking to establish a more structured supply chain. And in order to do that, you need some information. And so they can be involved in the review, you'd like them to provide this information for you. And what you want is a simple spreadsheet for a defined period, which would be around about 12 months. And you want them to provide, as the list shows on here, all the temporary workers that they've supplied, what their job titles are, the sites they've been supplied, the charge rate to you as a business, and also the markup they were working on. If you've got any agencies that aren't prepared to declare to you what their markup is, that tells you all you need to know about that agency, and they should certainly be on the list of agencies that you might wish to dispense with at some point. The total 12-month revenue hire and the start and finish date. So if you put all that information together, you're going to have a fairly good idea of what's going on with your business. And the 80-20 rule, one of those fundamental rules of the universe, will almost certainly apply, and you'll find that approximately 80% of your spend is going to be with about 20% of the agencies. And then you'll have a whole raft of agencies that you're doing relatively low amounts of spend with. So you've got the business case approved. You've now got a good picture of where your business is in terms of how much you're spending and who you're spending it with. So what do you do next? Well, I think you've got two options. You can do your own RFP process, inquiry process, as you would with any other category, or you could outsource it to an MSP. So let's deal with option one first, the DIY RFP for a PSL. A lot of initials in there, aren't they? So what's a PSL? Hang on, go back a bit. What's a PSL? A PSL is a preferred supplier list. If you're involved in procurement, you almost certainly have a preferred supplier for every single category, whether it's roof trusses, bricks, stationery, or whatever. It's just that in the agency labour market, it's known as a PSL, a preferred supplier list. So a preferred supplier list is the smallest number of agencies that you need to meet the needs of your business in terms of geographical coverage and in terms of capability, their ability to supply particular kinds of job roles. The thing about when you're taking a category from being unmanaged to managed, you're effectively asking the supply chain to work for you for less money. So you need to provide them with a compelling business opportunity, commercial opportunity as to why they should do that. It's quite simple to do. You're talking about setting up a PSL, so the successful agencies are going to be part of the smaller supply chain, so they're going to have the opportunity to do more work with you. You're offering them improved business processes because they're going to start working in a structured way with you, following your standard commercial processes. That means they're going to get improved cash flow because they're going to be paid on time. And those two elements mean that you're going to be a lower cost customer to them. If you don't issue a project pipeline to your supply chain, and I would really recommend that you do, if they get that project pipeline, they are going to have they're going to see what the new projects that are approaching, and they'll have the opportunity to work with you in a proactive way. So fundamentally, what you're offering them is a long-term, low-cost, collaborative relationship, in turn for which you want them to trade that off against reduced markup. Why wouldn't they? Exactly. So, right, what should the RFP look like? First of all, who should you include? There's one thing that is unique about this category is you will have lobbying like you've never heard before from your colleagues within the business to use particular agencies if you're suggesting that that you're not going to use them. Okay, of all proportion out of any other category that you've managed. So if you are suggesting, if you can look at when you're making sense of the chaos, your information, people will jump off the page as agencies that you shouldn't be doing. However, shouldn't be dealing with rather. But my recommendation would be to include everybody in the RFP, no matter how many there are, because then you will be able to say to your colleagues within the business, everybody has given an opportunity. And if your instincts are right about agencies that you shouldn't be using, the information they provide as part of the RFP will make that case for you. So you will, when you get lobbied, and you'll be able to use that objective commercial data or whatever to say, this is why I'm recommending we don't continue with this particular agency. Okay, so what should the RFP look like? Another basic egg sucking lesson. You should make clear from the first part of the RFP that you're looking for them to reduce their markup. The nuts and bolts of the commercial arrangement with you should consist of a rate card. You can create a simple rate card with a spreadsheet, list all the temporary worker roles that your business is going to use. You would have got that information from collecting the data in the information gathering stage. You're also going to want them to declare the markup they're working on. And again, if you've got agencies that aren't prepared to declare that, they're agencies that you don't want to be dealing with. As far as fixed price period is concerned, certainly 12 months should be a minimum. Outside of the fixed price period, if there are any changes in, for example, in minimum wage, that will be the exception to the fixed price period. You don't want to be seen as a client who is refusing to pay increases in minimum wage. So irrespective of your fixed price period, if 4 months into the agreement, it increases by £1 an hour, you're going to agree to pay for that. As far as rebate is concerned, if it's genuine rebate, absolutely. If the more you deal with an agency, as your turnover with them increases, they're going to enjoy economies of scale. In other words, they're going to be making more profit. It's not unreasonable for that increase in profit to be shared with you via a tiered rebate structure as you reach turnover threshold. Any agency that is offering you a rebate from zero, I would suggest is simply adding on the rebate so they can pay it back to you in 12 months. That needs to be viewed with a considerable degree of suspicion. Now, the initial upfront savings to the business are going to be delivered by the reduction in markup. But in terms of the longer term savings for the business, that's going to be delivered by you managing the category more efficiently. And what's going to enable you to do that is management data behind the nature of the temporary workers and how you're using them. So you need to define a reporting regime and include that as part of the RFP, what data you would like from them and how often you would like it. And they need to agree to comply with that. You are also going to be asking them to work to your processes, whatever they are, for engaging temporary workers. So you need to define what they are so that they confirm that they will agree to comply with them. I'm not sure whether you send out PQQs with, PQQs with all of your RFPs, but this is a category where you absolutely need one, particularly regarding the regulatory risk that you're going to be exposed to by an agency which is not acting properly. Identity verification is a big risk. How do they make sure the person they interview for the job is the person who actually turns up on site? That is a big risk. How do they ensure that the person that they're sending to you has the right to work in the UK, that they're not an illegal immigrant? How do they know that the worker supplied to you is not a victim of modern slavery, who's having to hand over 80% of their wages because of some bonded labour scheme that's going on? Tax compliance is another big one. Agency workers used to be a bit of a Wild West situation again as far as tax. You could be self-employed when you weren't self-employed. You could be a limited company when you weren't really a limited company. But most of that has now been eliminated, and all agency workers have to generally work on a PAYE basis. How do you know the agency is actually ensuring that that is actually happening and are complying with those requirements? Qualification verification, that's another big issue in agency workers, and that's qualifications to operate certain items of plant, and also health and safety qualifications, CSCS. There's a lot of fraud goes on in those sectors as well, and also stuff like GDPR. So you really do need to know in detail how agencies address those issues. And my recommendation is always insist on a narrative response to your question. What you tend to get, if you don't get that, you have your question: how do you ensure compliance with IR35, for example? How do you establish the identity of the individual? And then just say, see attached policy, see attached policy, see attached. Great to have the policy. Get them to do a narrative response as well. So you've completed. Hang on, go back. We're not there yet. So you've gone through the RFP process. You've identified who your PSL is going to consist of, and obviously you'll have to go through a period of consultancy with your internal customers, and it will be quite a heated debate, I can guarantee you. Particularly, certain individuals will be advocating very strongly to continued use of agencies that you're suggesting that you shouldn't continue using. But again, if you've done the job properly and you've got that objective commercial data, common sense should prevail. And I would recommend that you run the PSL for a period of 2 years, and during that time, you'll get a greater understanding of the way the category works. You'll have a greater understanding of the performance of the agencies, and you'll have a greater understanding of the needs of your business. And it may be that you need to be flexible. There may be some niche requirements that you become aware of. For example, in Galliford Try, we had an FM division that used to do lots of work in schools during term time. So there were children there. And there was one particular agency that specialised in an extra level of vetting. I think it's DBS checks, Jared, that they do, yeah? The criminal records check, so which isn't a matter of routine for an agency. And all the agency workers that they provided have been through a full DBS check. So quite often you may need to create a tier 2 PSL to provide those niche requirements. They won't have access to all of your business, but they'll just be there when you need them. And it may be that some agencies don't perform as you expected, so you might have to drop them and bring some. Same with any other category that you manage, but I would suggest that you run it for about 2 years before you review it, and you'll have lots of fun conversations with your colleagues, I can assure you, particularly along the lines of, right, I need to go back to a B agency now because I've tried the PSL and they can't provide it. And those conversations tend to be fairly short. So you say, oh, really? So who did you speak to at the PSL then? I spoke to so-and-so. They're not on the PSL. Oh, right, okay. And then they remember the name of an agency on their PSL. It's, oh, so you spoke to Randstad then, did you? Yeah. Who did you talk to at Randstad? Oh, I didn't get their name. What telephone number? And it soon ends. And you'll have lots of fun conversations like that. And eventually they give up and stick with the PSL. So that's option one, your own DIY PSL. Option two is the MSP option, outsource it to an MSP. What is an MSP? An MSP is an organization that sits above your agency supply chain, who are your single point of contact for agency labor. Outside the construction industry, MSPs are very, very common, and certainly the majority nature of engaging temporary workers. If you look at retail organisations who have big distribution networks, warehouses, and what have you, they will have periods of peak demand, particularly around Christmas time, where they will engage a lot of temporary workers. They will generally be doing that via an MSP. A lot of these non-construction MSPs came into the construction sector about 7 or 8 years ago, promising massive year-on-year savings in terms of your agency worker costs. Everything was to be absolutely fantastic, and they all crashed and burned one by one because the construction industry and our supply chain is completely unique. It is, unless you work in it, if you look and understand, you look at it from outside, it looks like a complete basket case, and it generally is. And anybody who is not familiar with the way the construction industry works, any MSP is absolutely set to fail. But what you have now in the industry is Hayes and Randstad, for example, have set up construction-specific MSP platforms. Datum, obviously, an MSP, and some of the medium-sized, more forward-looking agencies are now looking to set up MSP platforms. And it is the way the market is going. The construction industry is behind the curve, but it is the way the market is going down the MSP route if you have a significant temporary labour spend. There are two kinds of MSP. Hang on, can we go back a minute? There are two kinds of MSPs. There's the master vendor and the neutral vendor. The master vendor is where the MSP employs one agency, and that tends to be one of their sister companies within the group. For example, Hayes have a master vendor relationship with Hayes MSP operation as a master vendor relationship with Hayes, the recruitment agency. I'm not a big fan of those because it does rely on you using one agency. And if you have a very diverse requirement, whether it's geographic or in terms of the job roles, it's a struggle sometimes for a single agency to meet that requirement. What you can sometimes then have is a tier 2 agencies that act below the master vendor agency, and quite often there's some of the original agencies from a client supply chain, and they just end up getting scraps from the table that the master vendor agency can't meet, and they have no vested interest in making that arrangement work. If they'd previously been a core supplier to that client and they're now a tier 2 and a master vendor, why should they help the master vendor relationship succeed? I was saying that Kiers have had a master vendor relationship with arrangement with Hayes for a number of years. I've spoken to quite a few people at Kiers. A lot of them are big fans of it, others not so much, but they have renewed it on a number of occasions, although I understand they're currently reviewing it. I think the most sustainable model is the neutral vendor model, where the MSP sits above a number of agencies that all act and complete for the MSP's clients' agency requirement. And you are, Joe, Datum is the neutral vendor model, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah,
neutral,
you have a supply chain of agencies that sit below you. So if you are going down the MSP route, then what is it the MSP actually delivers? But first of all, they're going to do all the donkey work for you. You're going to give them access to your purchase ledger. You're going to give them access to your supply chain. They're going to look at what you're spending money on, how you're spending it, the way you're doing it, the rates that you're paying. And on the basis of their more competitive supply chain, they are going to be able to offer you a significant saving against your existing costs if you're not managing the category properly. Obviously, that saving is a one-off. They can only save you that money once, but it will generally be a significant chunk of money and certainly make it worthwhile using the MSP. They're also going to protect you from all the regulatory risk. Their due diligence should be absolutely spot on. So should be no chance of you ending up on the front page of the Times because you've had a load of illegal immigrants working on your site. So that's a big benefit. You can rest easy and know that that's being taken care of. But from my point of view, the big benefit of using an MSP is the process platform. The initial savings are going to come from you paying less for the agency workers. The medium to long-term savings are going to come from management data and process changing. And the MSP's process platform is the principal way to deliver that. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay. So what are the benefits of the process platform? The process platform sits outside your business. It's not part of your internal system. It's an external entity that you deal with online. You'll have at the top of it, you'll have a hire desk. So that will be either a dedicated resource or a shared resource, depending on what your spend is. So your internal customers will have a go-to resource to talk to, either by the online system or by telephone, a dedicated resource to manage their recruitment of temporary labour on their behalf, rather than somebody internally who's also doing a dozen other things at the same time. What the platform will give you if you're managing a category is end-to-end visibility of the process. You can see who's recruiting, what kind of job roles are being, when they're appointed, how long they go on site for, the rate that's being paid, when they'll have their payment situation, timesheet approval, you name it, that will all be visible on the system. So it's end-to-end process visibility. It's a paperless process. So you're going to have process savings within your business. You can create a bespoke approval regime. If you have a control freakery within your business, and Galliford Try certainly did within a construction sector, they were terrified of anybody actually spending any money. And there were massive checks and balances. You can create those within the system. You can have a approval regime, which depends on value, depends on job role, depends on duration. You can create multi-level approvals within the business if you wanted to. So it might be approved by a contracts manager, then approved by a commercial manager. You name it, you can create a approval regime to meet whatever the needs and checks and balances that you require. From a surveyor's point of view, it's fantastic. Even if you've got a fairly efficient purchase to pay system, you can still have a 4 to 6 week delay before costs appear on your system if you're operating a 30 or 60 day payment regime. With the process platform, as soon as a timesheet has been signed and that entire process is online, and only people you designate with the approval to approve timesheets can actually approve them. As soon as that timesheet is approved, within a couple of days, that cost liability is going to appear on the system. So when a surveyor is doing his PLL or valuation or whatever, they will know immediately what their cost liability was as of the previous Friday, if that's timesheet signing day. Another tool that they can provide is what I call order value burn down. The problem is that you engage a temporary worker for a set value or time, and it's very difficult to monitor the extent to which that order value is being exhausted, particularly with the possible 6 weeks delay in costs appearing on your ledger. The order burn value value burn down report can give you a traffic light report line by line coded in green, amber, red, and it can show you how close the order values are getting to expiring. And you can create some checks and balances around that. For example, you can send a message to your site manager and say, unless you request for your commercial team that the order value for your forklift driver is extended, you're going to have to learn how to drive a forklift on Monday morning. There's no end to what you can do with these systems. It eliminates purchase to pay failures. The system is raised, the order is raised on the system. It can't be wrong. It can only be raised for rates that exist on the system. The invoice can't be submitted until a designated approver has approved the timesheet online. Therefore, invoices simply can't be wrong. So as they can't be wrong, there's no need to check them. So that actually supports consolidated invoices if you want. You can have one invoice per business, per site, whatever you want to set up. And all the information in terms of individual cost centers will be behind that. But there's massive process failures for you as a business. The other key element is the management data. As I said earlier, your initial savings are going to come from the markup reduction from the agencies. The medium to long-term savings are going to come from how you manage the category better, more efficiently. The management data is the resource for that. And there's an endless amount of information you can get about how you are engaging and how you're using temporary labour. It can highlight, for example, that there are certain job roles we should look at permanent recruitment. It's just one of the small advantages of it. But that is that data is what's going to deliver longer term savings. And it's important also for if we're a good MSP. What you don't want is somebody every quarter or every month or whatever just says, right, here's a load of data, get on with it. You want an MSP who's going to say, right, here's the quarterly report on your spend. The implications of that report are this. Our recommendation to deal with that is such and such. And if you follow what we're recommending here, you will make savings of X, Y, and Z. So you want active management of the data from the MSP. How's it paid for? Quite simply, by the agencies. It should be zero cost to you. They will take a hit on their markup to fund the MSP process platform. Why should they do that? Well, there are significant savings for the agencies as well, particularly their purchase to pay process. It's a self-billing arrangement for them anyway, so they're not going to be raising, issuing, and chasing invoices. So there's big process for savings for them as well. You can set the system up so that if you want, that every agency gets an opportunity to put a candidate forward for a temporary worker requirement, so they will get more opportunities. The key, however, is that the charge to the agency still leaves them with a sustainable markup. Because if you look at where this hasn't worked particularly successful, the MSP takes a too big a chunk of the agency's markup, and they just lose interest. They stay on the platform, but they're not really participating actively. They just put the B team on it. The A team off elsewhere, serving customers that they can make more money from. And particularly where there are labour shortages, that margin, that markup must remain sustainable for them, to give them a reason to remain part of it. So they're the two core options. There is a third option, and it's certainly the option that I was considering before the Galliford Try organisation split up, is that you manage the PSL yourself for a period of time, and you really get to understand your category. And you then look at an MSP, not to deliver necessarily the massive savings from reduction markup, because if you're managing the category properly, they're not going to be there. But in terms of benefits that they can offer you, process benefits they can offer you in terms of using the MSP platform and the production of management data and all the other benefits of the process platforms. So that's it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. It's really interesting to hear it from the other side of the story, the other side of the table, so to speak. Of course, it's what I've been preaching about for the past 15 years or so. So it's good to have that validated. There has been one question come through, and I'll go through that. But if there are any other questions, if you can just ping them through, and we'll go through them one by one. So the first question was, or is, when it comes to worker classification, how and when do procurement decide if it's time and materials or if it's a statement of work?
How and when, sorry, give me that one again, Gerard.
So how do you decide whether the worker's just going to be paid hourly for the work that they do, or whether it's a statement of work? So I guess the question is around, how do you decide whether they're PAYE or limited company worker under a statement of work?
Well, in terms of my experience, certain certain job roles tend to be paid in a certain way, so much per day or so much per hour, and my recommendation would just really be go with the norms that have been accepted or that exist within the category for that particular job role. So if you've got blue collar, for want of a better word, workers tend to be paid by the hour. If they're used to being paid by the hour, if the industry generally pays them by the hour, pay them by the hour. There's no real benefit. Market forces tend to develop the best way to do things in many ways, and if there's an established way of paying particular workers in a particular way, then run with it. And more of the high value white collar workers tend to be paid, it tends to be so much per day. So just go with established norms. There's no real reason to change them in my experience.
And what's your view then on just staying on that subject? Obviously IR35, well, it's been around for 20 odd years, but the legislation was changed quite recently. What's your view on agency workers that let's say for Galliford Try, when you were there, are any of those job categories, in your opinion, are they genuinely self-employed, or do you think that
and that they weren't really before IR35? If you look at the test of the supervision, direction and control test, and I have had many philosophical discussions with agencies about whether a labourer is self-employed. Is he subject to supervision and direction and control? If they're subject to supervision, direction and control, they're PAYE. But I can remember having a discussion with an agency that they wanted to supply a labourer as self-employed, and the conversation went along the lines of, okay, I know he's been told to clean the site toilets, but he hasn't been told how to clean the site toilets, has he? He decides himself. So, and conversation we had about something about crane drivers, that they are different. They're not. A crane driver, tower crane driver is a forklift driver with a better view. That's all he is. He's not, the other tests are, do they bring their own equipment to site? No, they don't. You know, are they subject to financial risk? No, they're not. Can they send somebody else in to do their work on their behalf? No, they can't. So there are no situations now, particularly with IR35, which has now eliminated the exception of private limited companies. There are now no exceptions to the rule. Any temporary worker should be employed on a PAYE basis. So if you've got any temporary workers that you're engaged in who are employed even on CIS basis or limited company basis, then you are at risk of tax non-compliance. And if there's one failing, I mean, MHRC have been very good at bringing out very specific and targeted legislation, but they're never very good at policing it. And so that does lead, and what you tend to get sometimes in the industry, all the tier 1 contractors comply with it 100%. All the tier 2 contractors, not so much. But until MHRC actually prosecutes somebody, that's probably not going to change. So, but you don't really want to be the organisation that gets prosecuted. And as I say, it may be the agency at fault, but it's you as the company employing the temporary worker who are going to get the headlines. So, but as far as you know, from my knowledge of IR35 and the supervision, direction and control test, everybody should be PAYE. And part of the vetting process, you know, because most agency workers are paid by umbrella companies, you know, and part of the vetting process is that how do the agencies ensure that the umbrella companies are complying with MHRC requirements, but everybody should be PAYE.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just one final question, because we're almost up to the hour now. So you mentioned rebates. You mentioned building in a genuine rebate that isn't just the agency adding on whatever 50p an hour. Do you have any recommendations on what level of rebate that should be?
I don't know, really. I can't quote you any numbers off the top of my head, but you know, any genuine even if you're doing a hell of a lot of business with a company, rebates really shouldn't be more than 2-3%. You know, if it gets beyond that, then you know, common sense tells you that there's a certain element of the charge rate that's being inflated to create a false rebate. I think you should you should always look to get you know, if you suppose you've got an agency work out you're dealing with, you had no idea how much work you're going to do with them, but it ends up being a consistent level of business which attracts, say, a rebate of 3%. And realistically, you should be saying to that company, well, as we've now established, we're going to do 2 million a year with you, and we consistently get 3% rebate. Let's have 3% rebate off the charge rate. Whether that manifests itself on your bottom line or not, or whether that's the best way to do it, is really up to your business, you know. And you know, let's be honest, some businesses like rebate, and it's quite handy at the end of the year end to have a load of free money come in, and they'd rather it come in at a group level than be lost on the bottom line. So it's a nuanced discussion, really.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, perfect timing that, Kevin. We've just hit the hour. I just wanted to say thanks ever so much. That was really good. I really hope everyone found it of interest. Everyone will get a recording of this, so feel free to share it. I'll also we'll share your contact details as well.
Okay.
And if anyone wants to speak to me more about managed services, then please get in touch. But
Okay.
yeah, thanks again.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.